On the 8th of September, 1965, the main Pakistani blow in the Khem-Karan sector began to turn Asal-Uttar from a prepared defensive idea into a test of survival. The Indian withdrawal had created a defensive zone. Mines had been laid, water had been used to soften the ground, and infantry and armor had begun to settle into a box around the likely approaches. But all of that preparation still had to survive contact with Pakistan's armored strength. This was the day when theory met movement, when reports of enemy tanks became actual vehicles advancing through fields and along roads. The first blow mattered because it revealed whether the defense could absorb shock without breaking apart. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. The Pakistani offensive carried the confidence of an armored counterstroke meant to restore initiative after India had widened the war in Punjab. The aim was not merely to retake ground lost in the earlier Indian advance or to punish a forward division. The larger purpose remained the possibility of breaking through Khem-Karan, pushing toward Peaky Wind, and threatening the routes toward Harike and the Beas crossings. That larger purpose gave urgency to the attack. The armored formation had to move fast enough to prevent India from turning withdrawal into a durable defense. Yet, by the morning of the 8th of September, Indian preparation was already changing the battlefield. Pakistan was not advancing into empty space. It was advancing into a landscape deliberately made difficult. The opening of the attack should be imagined not as one perfectly ordered line of tanks appearing all at once, but as a developing crisis across routes, fields, and local positions. Pakistani units moved forward from the direction of Khem-Karan and the Pakistani side of the border, probing and pushing into the Indian defensive zone. Dust, crops, artillery bursts, smoke, and limited visibility complicated what each side could see. Indian defenders had to interpret reports quickly. Where were the tanks? How many were coming? Were they supported by infantry? And which approach was the main threat? In battle, the first minutes of contact are often filled with uncertainty. The side that turns uncertainty into coordinated action gains an advantage far beyond the first exchange of fire. For the Pakistani tank crews, the battlefield was already refusing to behave like a clean, armored route. The ground did not allow unlimited freedom. Some areas were soft or waterlogged, some approaches were mined, and some fields concealed Indian positions until the range became dangerous. A tank force advancing into such country has to make constant choices. Stay on firmer roads and risk being predictable, or leave the road and risk bogging, mines, and hidden fire. Push ahead and risk outrunning infantry, or wait and lose tempo. These choices are not abstract. They are made by commanders under pressure, by drivers reading the ground through narrow vision, and by crews who know that a wrong movement can trap them. The Indian defenders had their own burden. It is one thing to plan a killing zone, and another to remain steady while enemy armor approaches. Infantrymen in field positions and village defenses had to hold while artillery and tank fire shook the ground around them. Anti-tank crews had to wait for useful shots rather than waste fire too early. Tank crews had to use concealment and fire discipline, engaging when the enemy was vulnerable instead of revealing themselves at the first sign of movement. Artillery observers had to call fire onto moving targets and likely concentrations. The defensive box depended on each arm doing its work at the right time. If one part failed, the pressure on the others would grow rapidly. The first blow also tested communications. Reports from forward positions had to move upward and sideways, while orders had to reach units that might already be under fire. Radios helped, but they did not remove confusion. A commander might hear that tanks were approaching one village, only to learn moments later that another route was threatened. Artillery requests could compete for attention. tank units might need permission or warning before shifting position. In armored warfare, speed is not only physical movement, it is the speed with which information becomes decision. Pakistan was trying to move fast enough to unhinge the defense. India was trying to think fast enough to keep the defense connected. As contact developed, the defensive preparations began to show their value. Mines and difficult ground slowed the attackers in places, and slowing was the first step toward destruction. A moving tank is hard to hit and harder to trap as part of a larger formation. A tank that stops, turns, bunches with others, or tries to pick a route through uncertain ground becomes more vulnerable. Indian fire could then fall on vehicles that had lost the smooth momentum needed for exploitation. This did not mean every Pakistani tank was immediately destroyed, and it did not mean the battle was easy. It meant that the Indian defense was beginning to impose its terms. The attack was still dangerous, but it was no longer entirely free. The psychological effect of the early engagements mattered on both sides. For the attackers, the first losses or delays could raise doubts about whether the enemy was truly collapsing. A tank crew seeing vehicles hit nearby or hearing reports of mines and hidden guns begins to treat the ground differently. Caution spreads, and caution costs time. For the defenders, early success could strengthen confidence that the plan might work. Even one or two effective engagements can change the feeling of a battle. Men who had withdrawn the day before could begin to believe that the retreat had not been a defeat, but a move into a position where the enemy could be hurt. Morale is not separate from tactics. It grows or falls through tactical experience. The fighting on the 8th of September also showed the danger of tanks becoming separated from the full combined arms system. Pakistani armor needed infantry to clear close resistance, engineers to deal with mines and obstacles, artillery to suppress Indian positions, and reconnaissance to find the safest and most useful routes. When that cooperation faltered or slowed, the tanks faced increasing exposure. Indian defenders, by contrast, needed to keep their own arms connected under pressure. Infantry had to hold long enough for tank and artillery fire to matter. Armor had to support without being wasted. Engineers' earlier work had to be protected by fire. The day's battle was therefore not a simple duel of machines, but a competition between two systems trying to function under stress. The terrain around villages such as Asal-Uttar and nearby positions began to shape the action in ways that broad operational plans could not fully control. Villages created hardpoints and visual breaks. Crops hid movement and weapons. Wet ground and irrigation features limited the freedom of heavy vehicles. Roads became attractive because they promised firmness, but they also made movement predictable. This is one of the oldest truths of mechanized warfare. The attacker wants options, while the defender wants to reduce options. By the end of the first day's major contacts, the Pakistani thrust had not yet become the clean rupture imagined in the plan. It had entered a fight where every further move demanded more caution and more coordination. For Indian 4 Mountain Division and the supporting armored units, survival on the 8th of September was itself an operational achievement. The division had been under pressure, had withdrawn, and had only limited time to organize. If the Pakistani attack had shattered the defensive box on the first day, the road beyond Khem-Karan might have opened before India could properly respond. Instead, the defenders held together. That did not mean the battle was decided. More severe fighting would follow, and the Pakistani offensive still had strength. But the first blow had failed to produce immediate collapse. In a battle of tempo, denying the attacker quick decision can be the beginning of victory. The human experience of that day was harsh and frightening. Tank crews fought inside steel hulls filled with heat, noise, fumes, and the knowledge that a single hit could turn the vehicle into a trap. Infantrymen faced the approach of machines that seemed enormous at close range. Artillerymen served guns while trying to keep up with urgent fire missions. Engineers and support troops worked in areas where the front was not always clear. Civilians in the surrounding countryside saw fields and roads transformed into a battlefield. The first blow at Asal-Uttar was not a neat test of doctrine. It was a day of fear, confusion, discipline, and violence, with every local decision carrying consequences for the larger front.
By the end of 8 September, the trap had not yet fully closed, but it had proved that it could hold. Pakistan's armored thrust had entered the defended zone and found movement harder than expected. Indian forces had endured the first shock and begun to break up the momentum of the advance. The battle was now moving from preparation into attrition, from the hope of rapid breakthrough into the reality of a fight shaped by mines, flooded ground, concealed fire, and village defenses. The first blow did not end the struggle, but it changed its meaning. Pakistan still sought the road to the Bias, yet that road was already narrowing. Asal-Uttar had begun to answer armored ambition with terrain, timing, and organized resistance.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.